Night of the Hartwell Medical Gala, I was standing in the lobby of the Fairmont with a letter inside my clutch that no one in that room knew existed. My mother-in-law was already there. I could see her from across the marble foyer in her ivory column dress, holding a champagne flute like it was a scepter. She caught my eye and smiled. That particular smile, the one she'd been giving me for 4 years. Thin, patient, and just slightly pitying, the way you might smile at a child who doesn't yet understand how the world works. She had no idea what I was about to do. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. I met my husband at 26. I was working as a registered nurse at Riverside General in Cincinnati, pulling double shifts in the cardiac unit, eating vending machine sandwiches at 2 in the morning, and genuinely loving every exhausting minute of it. He came in with his bother, chest pains, turned out to be nothing serious, and we talked in the hallway while his bother was being monitored. He was charming, funny in a quiet way. He asked for my number before he left. What I didn't know then, what took me embarrassingly long to understand, was that charm was his only consistent quality. His family was old Cincinnati money. Not flashy new money wealthy, but the kind of wealth that's been sitting in the same accounts for 3 generations and has developed opinions about everything because of it. His mother, whom I will call exactly what she was, my mother-in-law, ran the family's charitable foundation and sat on the board of 2 hospitals in the city. His father was semi-retired from a real estate development company. They lived in a restored Victorian in Hyde Park and had a lake house in Michigan they referred to as the cottage, even though it had 6 bedrooms and a boat dock. I grew up in Dayton. My dad drove a school bus for 30 years. My mom worked part-time at a dental office until her back gave out, and then she worked from home doing medical billing. We weren't poor, we just weren't them. The first time I met my mother-in-law, she shook my hand and said, "A nurse. How wonderful. Such important work." The way she said it, the slight pause before important, I filed it away. I told myself I was being paranoid. I wasn't. The comments were never loud. That was the thing about her. She didn't yell or make scenes. She was precise. Surgical even. She'd ask at family dinners whether I'd looked into moving into administration, as if the floor work was something I should be aging out of. She'd tell her friends within my earshot that her son had married a working girl, very salt of the earth. She once handed me an article, actually printed out on paper and left on the kitchen counter during Christmas, about nursing burnout, with a highlighted line about how many nurses leave bedside care by 40. I kept thinking my husband would say something. I kept waiting. He never did. He wasn't cruel to me. I want to be clear about that, because I've told this story to people who assume he must have been some kind of monster, and the truth is more complicated and somehow worse. He was passive. Conflict made him physically uncomfortable. Whenever I brought up something his mother had said, he'd listen with this expression of genuine distress and then say something like, "She doesn't mean it that way," or "She's just from a different generation," or my personal favorite, "Can we not do this tonight?" So I stopped bringing it up. I absorbed it. I got very good at smiling in the same way she did. Thin, patient, slightly pitying, and redirecting conversations. 4 years of that. The breaking point wasn't dramatic at first. It was a Tuesday in March. I came home from a 12-hour shift and found my mother-in-law sitting at our kitchen table. She had a key. She used it whenever she wanted, and I had made peace with this the same way I'd made peace with everything else. Badly, quietly, alone. She had made tea. She offered me a cup. I sat down because my feet hurt and I hadn't eaten since breakfast. "I want to talk to you about something," she said. She told me that she'd been thinking about the future. Her son's future, specifically. She said she loved me, that she'd always cared for me, but that she was being honest because she respected me. She said she thought we wanted different things. She said she thought I was a wonderful person who might be better suited to a different kind of life. Then she slid a business card across the table. A divorce attorney. Someone her foundation apparently used for sensitive family matters. "I've already spoken with Jeffrey," she said. That's what she called my husband. Jeffrey. Never Jeff. He agrees it might be time. I think if you go into this gracefully, everyone comes out better for it. I looked at the card, I looked at her. I thought about 4 years of Christmas dinners and the article about nursing burnout and my husband's face every time I tried to tell him something was wrong. "Thank you for the tea," I said. I picked up the card. I put it in my pocket. I went upstairs and took a shower. I didn't cry until the water was running. And even then, it wasn't grief. It was something colder. Something that felt a lot like clarity. Here's what she didn't know about me. What most people didn't know, because I'd learned to take up as little space as possible in that house, in that family, I had been quietly working toward a master's degree in nursing administration for 2 years. Online, through Ohio State's program, while working full-time, while making dinner, while attending her foundation galas and smiling at her friends. I'd started because I genuinely wanted to advance. I'd kept going because something in me refused to be what they seemed to think I already was. I hadn't told my husband. I had tried to, early on. And he'd said something about how the timing wasn't great and maybe we should talk about it when things settled down. And I'd realized then that when things settled down was never going to come, because peace in that house required me to be still. So I stopped mentioning it. I just kept doing it. The week after the kitchen table conversation, I called the attorney whose card she'd given me. Not to hire him, to ask, just out of curiosity, what a divorce might look like financially. He was professional. He told me that because I had been the one consistently contributing to our household expenses, while my husband's income had been inconsistent, he'd left 2 jobs in 4 years and his family supplemented him in ways that were undocumented and in cash. I was actually in a reasonable position. He also mentioned that my student loan debt from nursing school was entirely mine, but so would be my future earning potential. I thanked him and hung up. Then I made a different call to a hospital recruiter I'd met at a conference 18 months earlier who had mentioned, offhandedly, that her hospital was always looking for strong candidates for their clinical operations track. I'd kept her number. I pulled it up, called her, and had a 40-minute conversation that ended with her asking if I could come in the following week. I scheduled the interview. I also called my dad that night. He answered on the second ring the way he always does, like he's been waiting. I didn't tell him everything. I just said things were changing and that I was figuring some things out. He said, "You've always figured things out, sweetheart. You just sometimes forget that you have." I wrote that down. I still have it. The next 3 months, I lived 2 lives in the same house. On the surface, nothing changed. I went to work. I came home. I attended the events I was expected to attend, including a fundraiser for my mother-in-law's foundation, where she introduced me to people as Jeffrey's wife, the nurse, with that same careful pause before nurse that she'd been using for years. I smiled. I shook hands. I ate the catered salmon and asked appropriate questions and went home and did my coursework until midnight. I had a second interview at the hospital, then a third. I received an offer for a director of clinical operations position in early June, base salary of $94,000, full benefits, and a title that would make anyone who had ever handed me an article about nursing burnout understand very clearly that they had miscalculated. I accepted the offer. My start date was September 1st. The Hartwell Medical Gala was August 14th. It was the biggest event on my mother-in-law's calendar. Her foundation was one of the primary sponsors. She'd been planning it for 8 months. Every important person in Cincinnati's medical and philanthropic community would be there, including the executive leadership of 3 hospital systems, including, as it happened, the CEO of the hospital system, where I was about to become director of clinical operations. I had RSVP'd months ago, before any of this, when I was still trying. I did not un-RSVP. The week before the gala, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I went shopping by myself, for myself, without asking anyone's opinion. I found a dress, deep navy, structured, the kind of thing that doesn't ask for attention, but commands it anyway. I had my hair done. I got exactly enough sleep. The night of the gala, I put the offer letter in my clutch, the official one, on hospital letterhead, with my title and my salary and my start date. I don't fully know why I did this. Some part of me knew. The Fairmont Ballroom was everything my mother-in-law was good at. Beautiful, controlled, expensive. without being obvious about it. Round tables with low floral arrangements so people could see and be seen. A string quartet in the corner. The kind of soft lighting that makes everyone look like they're being interviewed for a magazine profile about successful people. My husband was already at our table when I arrived. He looked up when I walked over and said, "You look nice." The way he said it was the same way he said most things to me by then. Technically a compliment, but fundamentally absent, like he was reading from a script someone else had written. My mother-in-law found me within 10 minutes. She touched my arm in that way she had, firm fingers, proprietary, and leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, which was expensive and which I had always associated with the feeling of being managed. "I'm glad you came," she said. I actually thought she stopped, tilted her head. "Well, we can talk later." "We can talk now," I said. "If you'd like." Something shifted in her face, the smile thinned just slightly. "I just meant, I know what you meant." I said it quietly. No heat in it, just a fact. She moved on to greet someone else. I watched her go and felt something settle in my chest. I'd spent 4 years being afraid of her in the specific way you fear someone who has power over something you love. I didn't love that life anymore. I wasn't sure I had for a while. Dinner was the usual progression of courses and conversations. I talked to a cardiologist about a study he'd recently published. I talked to a woman from the county health board about staffing shortages. I was good at these conversations. I had always been good at these conversations. I had always been good at them. I had just spent 4 years performing them in a supporting role rather than my own name. My mother-in-law gave a speech after the main course. It was polished and warm, the way she was polished and warm, carefully constructed to produce a specific effect. She thanked sponsors by name. She mentioned the foundation's impact numbers for the year. She made a joke that landed. Everyone applauded. And then, and I believe this was not accidental, because nothing she did was accidental, she said, "Of course, none of this happens without the people closest to us who support this work." She looked across the room at our table. At my husband. Jeffrey has been such a source of strength this year. Pause. For all of us. Not me. She looked at him. Only him. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. After her speech, as people were mingling during dessert, the CEO of my new hospital system, I will call him Dr. Tofter, Mercer, which is not his name but close enough, found me near the dessert table. We had met during my final interview round. He was a tall man in his 60s, unhurried in the way that people who don't need to prove anything tend to be. "I didn't realize you'd be here tonight," he said. "I've been coming to this gala for 4 years," I said. He seemed mildly surprised by that. Then he smiled. "Well, we're very glad you're joining us in September." I said thank you. He moved on. My mother-in-law saw that exchange from across the room. I watched her watching it, watched her try to place him, realize she knew exactly who he was, and then look at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Confusion. Actual, unguarded confusion. She came over within minutes. "How do you know Gerald?" she asked. Gerald was Dr. Mercer's first name. Of course she knew it. He's my CEO, I said. As of September 1st? Silence. "I'm sorry?" I reached into my clutch and took out the offer letter. I didn't hand it to her. I just held it, folded, between 2 fingers, the hospital letterhead visible at the top. Director of Clinical Operations. I accepted the offer last month. She stared at the letter. Then, at me. The string quartet was playing something soft. Someone behind us laughed at something. The room kept moving. "You didn't say anything," she finally said. "No," I agreed. "I didn't." She looked across the room at my husband. He was talking to someone, oblivious, holding his wine glass the way he always held it, like he was posing for a photo that would never actually be taken. "Jeffrey doesn't know either," I said. It wasn't a question. She turned back to me, and for one moment, just one, I saw something real on her face. Not anger. Not the cold management I'd grown accustomed to. Something more honest than that. Something that looked almost like reassessment. "The attorney you recommended," I said. "I called him. He was helpful." I put the letter back in my clutch. "I've already retained someone else for the actual process. It'll be straightforward. I don't want anything from Jeffrey except my own things, and the agreement covers that." She opened her mouth. "I know you came to me first because you thought I'd either fight it or fall apart," I said. "I understand why. I spent 4 years making sure you'd think that. I picked up a chocolate petite four from the dessert table and ate it, because I'd barely eaten all day and it was genuinely excellent. And then I said, 'Congratulations on the gala. The room looks beautiful.' And I walked away. I found my husband before I left and I told him, quietly, that the papers were already drafted and that his attorney, his mother's attorney, really, had the timeline. He looked at me with that expression of genuine distress, the one I had once mistaken for depth. I had learned, by then, that it was just his space when something required him to feel a real thing. "I didn't know she came to you like that," he said. "I know," I said. "That's also part of it." I kissed him on the cheek the way you say goodbye to something that you've already grieved. Then I got my coat and walked out into the August night. My car was in the parking structure 2 blocks away. I walked by myself, in my navy dress, with the offer letter still in my clutch, and the warm Cincinnati air on my face. I thought about my dad and his school bus and my mom and her back, and the way they'd built something whole out of modest materials for 30 years. I thought about the cardiac unit at Riverside General at 2 in the morning, and the way I'd felt the first time I helped stabilize someone and watched their vitals normalize on the monitor, and known in my body that I had done something that mattered. I had spent 4 years trying to earn my place in a life that was never going to have room for who I actually was. I started the car. I drove home, not to the house in Hyde Park, to my sister's house in Oakley, where I'd quietly moved 3 boxes of essentials 2 weeks earlier. Because the thing about clarity is that once you have it, you tend to start making logistical decisions. My sister had left the porch light on. She was asleep, but there was a note on the kitchen counter next to a plate of food she'd covered in plastic wrap and left in the refrigerator. The note said, "Well?" I wrote back on the same notepad, "Done." Then I sat at her kitchen table and ate leftover pasta and looked out at the quiet street and felt, for the first time in longer than I could precisely identify, like myself. The divorce was finalized 11 weeks later. It was not, as these things go, particularly complicated. My mother-in-law did not attend any proceedings. My husband was sad in that absent way of his, right up until he wasn't, which I've been told took about 6 weeks. I started my job on September 1st, as planned. It was a Tuesday. I wore a blazer I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Charcoal gray, fitted, the kind of thing that says I belong in this room without having to say it out loud. My office had a window. I had a team of 14 people reporting to me. In my first week, Dr. Mercer stopped by to check in and said the team had been looking for the right person for a long time. I thought about the 4 years. The Christmas article. The kitchen table. The offer letter folded in my clutch at a gala where someone had looked through me to praise the man beside me. "I've been working toward this for a while," I told him. That was true. In more ways than one. What I know now, that I didn't know at 26, is that some people will look at what you are and decide it tells them everything about what you're worth. And sometimes you're tired and lonely enough that you start to believe them. The believing is the dangerous part. Not their opinion. That was never about you, but the slow accommodation of it. The years of making yourself smaller to fit inside someone else's ceiling. I don't hold anger about it anymore. Anger requires you to keep paying attention to something, and I've got better things to pay attention to now. Last spring, I was asked to speak on a panel at a state nursing administration conference. Afterward, a younger nurse came up to me. She was maybe 24, still in scrubs, clearly had come straight from a shift. And she asked me how I'd made the transition from bedside to administration without losing what I cared about. I thought about it honestly. You don't actually lose it, I told her. You just find a bigger room to bring it into. She wrote that down. I watched her do it, this young woman in her scrubs with her pen and her notepad, and I thought about the person I'd been at her age, and the person I'd been at 30, and the person I am now. I am not interested in being anyone's cautionary tale, or anyone's inspiration, exactly. I'm just a woman who spent too long in a room that didn't fit and finally walked out the door. The light was on when I got home that night. It always is now. I put the key in the lock and went inside, and it was quiet, and it was mine.